Good afternoon, and welcome to our first week of Business 101, Introduction to Business. And tonight, we're going to be, or late this afternoon, we're going to be talking about chapters 1, 2, and 3. Chapter 1, Taking Risks and Making Profits Within the Dynamic Business Environment. Chapter 2 is about economics. And we'll talk about various economic systems, is what I want to say. And then chapter 3, doing business in the global markets. Very important because most of us will be doing that sometime in the future if we're not doing it right now. So we will begin by talking about our first chapters here, just for just a second. I need to get off of this, and we will look at our learning goals for this evening. Describe the relationship between profit and risk, and show how businesses and nonprofits can raise the standard of living for all. Compare and contrast being an entrepreneur with working for others. Analyze the effects of the economic environment on taxes in businesses. Describe the effects of technology on business, and of course that's something that's ever evolving as we go through today and tomorrow and sometime into the future. And then demonstrate how business can meet or beat competition. Analyze the social changes affecting businesses. Identify what businesses must do to meet global challenges, including war and terrorism. And then finally, review how past trends are being repeated in the present and what those trends mean for today and tomorrow's college graduates. So we'll begin here. Businesses provide to consumers one of two things. Some of them combine, some of them will offer two things. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. Goods and services. Goods are tangible, something you can hold in your hand, you can see, you can feel, etc. And the service is an intangible product, and that's something like a college education. It's also an insurance policy, healthcare, things of that nature. So we don't see those things. But now I said I was going to give you an example of a company that offers both. And this is probably good today, but it won't be good for much longer. It's General Electric. General Electric, as you know, makes airplane engines and things of that nature. But it also has a financial arm. Now, General Electric is going to spin that financial arm off, maybe not completely, but they will to some extent, and it'll be out for some period of time. Miss Simmons, I hope you can hear all right. I'm glad you joined. Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope you're there. So that's what goods and services are, and most companies, like I said, will offer one or the other. Some do offer both. Business and entrepreneurship. Business is an entity that operates to earn a profit by selling its goods and services, or both if they do that. An entrepreneur could be a business person. He or she may not be, and I'll explain that in just a second. An entrepreneur is a person who takes a risk of starting a business. Now, let's hold that thought for a second. Starting a business, and the risk, he or she risks time, resources, and other things. Now, it talks about to manage a business. There are some people who are entrepreneurs that they start a business and they really don't intend to keep the business very long. They may manage, or may actually have somebody else manage it for them, because they're in the pursuit of always starting a business. It's kind of like a chase for them. And I don't mean that to be bad. It's not meant to be bad. And it's something that they do. So they they go from one challenge to the next challenge. They don't stay there a very long period of time. But that doesn't mean to say that they can't or won't. It's just that often they do not. Now, there are three terms for you to know here. One, there are two of the three are very easy to understand: profit and loss. But the first is revenue. And revenue is the amount of money a business takes in a specified amount of time. Normally speaking, businesses talk about months or quarters, and then obviously annual. Some small businesses may be more concerned on a weekly basis, and so we'll see that. So that's the amount of money taken in. Profit is what a business has left after it pays all of its expenses, and those include salaries and rent, purchase of equipment and supplies and things of that nature. And of course, loss just means exactly what it says. Over that given amount of time or specified amount of time, this organization, this business, has lost money, and so that's what they report. Now, the next, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about risk, which we did talk about before, and there's not a whole lot more here we can say about it. Other than the fact that this is reinforcing a risk. And any business has a risk whenever it opens its doors. And that's because we don't always know the outside environment and things of that nature. That's something a business cannot control. Business can control its inside environment, what's inside its doors or what's inside its gates, if you will. But the outside environment it can't control. It tries to influence the outside environment by doing various and sundry things, but it can't control that. So businesses take a risk. They're always a risk. One of the things that businesses today, the large businesses today, are complaining about, that's a hard word to use, complaining about. But today, as we speak, is because the dollar is very strong. And it has cost them money overseas. A lot of our companies, majority of their business is done overseas. Now, I'm not talking here about offshoring or outsourcing or anything else. I'm just talking about selling product overseas. For instance, not too long ago, within the last 6 months to, well, maybe a little bit longer than 6 months, but certainly the last 9 months to a year, the dollar was trading around 130 to the euro. So in other words, if you wanted to buy a euro, you had to give them $1.30 in American money to buy a euro. It's down to about $1.12 right now. So you can just think about and see how that has changed. That's a 10%, over 10% drop. 10% would be 13 cents. It'd be 13 be down to $1.17 roughly. So it's higher than a 10% percentage difference, and that makes a huge difference for companies. So that's a little bit of a complaint, if you will. Now we switch here to talking about how your tax money is used, and I'm not going to read this laundry list. You can read that as well for yourself. We don't always think about how our tax money is used. Schools and libraries, and of course for police and fire protection and things of that nature. And in some cases, money is also spent to help people in need. Now, this is something that we always talk about, we hear a lot about, and we mention, and that is the standard of living. The United States, as you know, has a high standard of living. Our standard of living is not the highest in the civilized world, but it is rather high. And the standard of living just talks about the amounts of goods and services that people can buy with the money they have. It's as simple as that. And also note here, the standard of living is also part of cost that you have to pay for goods and services. So there are a lot of places in the world that may have a higher standard, well, not a higher standard, higher wage rate than what we find in the United States, but the cost of goods and services is higher, so it kind of evens things out to at least to some extent. Quality of life also goes along with standard of living, and that's just how people are able to, what do I want to say here? Able to navigate. And notice it talks here not only about wages, but it talks about political freedom. It talks about the environment. It talks about education. It talks about a number of other things that are very important to people. And so again, where you find that things have changed, we'll see that those are different from country to country. The next topic we talk about here, we're just trying to cover the basics of the basics in business that you kind of need to know and understand as you're navigating not only this course, but through business altogether and within your degree program. And that is stakeholders. Too often people mistake stakeholder and stockholder as being the same, and that's not true. Stockholder can be a stakeholder, but not all stakeholders are stockholders. Notice what's down here at the bottom of the slide. We talk about customers. We talk about the government. We talk about the community in which an organization operates. We talk about employees. And of course, the stockholders themselves. These are all folks who are stakeholders. There's others that I didn't add here. But they all have an interest in how well a particular company is doing. And so that's one of the things that a company has to do, especially a large one, is to try to get along with all the various stakeholders and keep all the various stakeholders satisfied. Notice I didn't use the word happy, satisfied. And that's not an easy task to do. Now, here we come about the old bugaboo here, and that's outsourcing. That's simply the shipping of, now let's start this first, and let's make sure we understand this properly, and then we'll get to the part that always bothers people. It is the shipping of manufacturing or of operations, and could be manufacturing, normally is, outside the confines of the United States. So when that happens, it say, okay, we're going to take this operation, we're going to put it over in XYZ company. It's in Y country. So what happens is that we move that operation, the company moves that operation over there, builds a plan, et cetera, and then it hires people, and then because it doesn't have the need for the employees in this country any longer, it does one of two. Oh, it does several things. It can lay them off. It might offer them early retirement or buyouts, or they might get transferred to another place within the company. But this is a complaint we have because these jobs are lost, and it's very difficult to bring those jobs back. One of the reasons the jobs are lost, pardon me, in many cases, is because they're labor intensive. And labor in most other countries in the world is less expensive than it is here in the United States. And so a company saves money when he does that. Now, there's another thing here too, and that is the American public is today and always has been in love with buying as cheaply as possible. And so we go to mega stores and do business with them because they offer prices that are less than somebody else. And most of the merchandise they sell is made outside the United States. It might be made for an American company, but it's made outside the United States. And so we don't pay a lot of attention. I'm saying the general and public, not everybody, not anybody in particular. We want things as cheaply as possible. And so that's what we do. And we tend to go to places based upon our pocketbook, how much money we have to spend. Now we have to remember when we do that, Uh, Anytime we do that, you're going to get what you pay for, no more and no less. Insourcing is, there's two things to do here. Notice it says foreign companies opening offices and factories in the United States, but there's another type of insourcing, and that's where a company with the United States gives up its something that it does not consider to be a core competency, and it moves that whatever that happens to be to another company within the United States. And so that in a sense is outsourcing because I'm taking it out of what I'm doing and putting it into somebody else. But on the other hand, it's insourcing because we're keeping it with the United States. Now, as used here, insourcing specifically refers to companies from outside the United States to bring manufacturing capacity. I'm specifically talking about that. It doesn't have to be manufacturing capacity, but that's what it normally is. And so that's the Honda plant in Maryville, Ohio, or the Honda plant over here in Greensburg, Indiana, the Toyota plant in Georgetown, Kentucky, all those within roughly 100 miles of the Cincinnati area, roughly 100 miles from where I'm seated right now. Some automakers, Mercedes-Benz has a plant in, I think, Alabama. Audi has a plant down there. Volkswagen just opened a plant not too long ago in South Carolina. I believe it was Volkswagen. And so that's insourcing. And that brings that capacity here and gives Americans jobs. Nonprofit organizations, exactly what it says. It's in business not to make a profit. And most of those organizations are in the people business. They have outreach and they're trying to help folks in various and sundry fashions. Largest one, of course, is United Way or United Appeal, and there are other ones around the country. They're not in business to make a profit, but they are there to help communities. And this is just a slide that gives you a few of the better known nonprofits within the United States. And you'll get one of the videos later in the course. I believe it's in chapter 18 on goodwill. Here's what nonprofits do. They have to have realistic goals that people can meet. People have to interact with the folks that they're serving. And you notice the last one here. It takes a special type of person to work for a nonprofit. And now I'm not talking about a college like this one is, or university, but I'm talking about people who work for United Way and Salvation Army and things of that nature. It is very both physically and emotionally draining. And so a lot of times those people need a little bit of a respite, and that should be certainly should be given to them. This is a social entrepreneur. This particular person here started a bank in India to help people buy homes and start businesses. This particular slide, and by the way, we'll talk about entrepreneurship several different times within this course, and I hope that you can get something out of that, especially those of you who aspire to start your own business. And I certainly congratulate you on that, and let you know that it is a challenge, but there are places that you can get help, and we'll talk more about that when we get into starting your own business in chapter 6, and well, some in chapter 5, but specifically in chapter 6, and things of that nature. There are a lot of ups and downs in that. First of all, you have the freedom to succeed. You can make your own decisions. You can decide what you want to sell. You can decide where you want to sell it. You can decide whether you want to have employees or not have employees. The downside, of course, is not only do you have an ability to succeed, you also have an ability to fail. There are no perks. perks being paid vacations and, well, let me take it away from perks. That's a different term. Benefits. There's no paid vacation. There's no health care. There's not a lot of things that if you want them, you have to pay for them yourself. Well, another thing is, especially if you're, and we'll talk again about this later, and I'll make that point again later, and that is if you are a sole proprietor, regardless of whether you have employees or not, you are the business and the business is you, and you can't divorce one from the other. And that can be a detriment. It can be a tremendous plus as well. This slide just talks about who takes the entrepreneurial challenge. I really don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this slide. You can read what's on the slide as well as I can. Remember, the lecture will be uploaded tomorrow to Campus Web. You'll be able to see this again if you wish, or be able to look at the slides again if you wish, however you wish to do that. What it says is that entrepreneurship has no bounds. Any person in the United States can open his or her own business whenever and wherever he or she wants to do that. And this just talks a little bit about networking here. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I'll give you some kind of an idea of entrepreneurial adventures and things that people do. Now, this is a very important slide, and I do want you to pay attention to it. Not so much that there's going to be a quiz on it, but this is very important because this particular thing that we're talking about here, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit more in chapter 2, which will be probably in about 25 or so minutes, and that is the 5 factors of production. Now, when I first started teaching this course 15 or more years ago, we only talked about the first 4. We talked about land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. We now have put knowledge into this because knowledge is a very important part of that, and we find knowledge becoming greater and greater and greater with the proliferation of the medium that I'm delivering this through tonight. That's on a PC here in my office, and the various ways we have to get information today and gain knowledge through iPads and the other things that we can use. And so knowledge is very important, and I would probably extend this a little bit to saying information. Of course, you have to take the information and make sense out of it to get the knowledge. But regardless, this is something that really has become very important. And it's become very important in the workplace, not just because of what I'm doing here tonight, but in many cases, you can't do your job without a computer or without a PC. And that's very interesting because many years ago, Thomas Watson, who was a founder of IBM, International Business Machines, that's what IBM actually stands for, and some of his friends felt that we would only need 4 supercomputers. Now, a supercomputer would be something that would be sitting in a room about twice or 3 times the size of the room I'm sitting in right now. And they felt that those four supercomputers could hold all the information that the world needed. Maybe you would like to say all the knowledge that the world needed. Well, what we know today is that what I'm using here tonight, this PC, holds more information than those 4 supercomputers held at that particular time. Now, this particular slide, and you probably can see this, well, I know you can see this much better in your text. And I want to flip over here and get this to you. This is figure 1.3 in your text. It's on page 11. That's the business environment. And as I say, it doesn't show up real well here, and I might have the capacity. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit for you. There it is a little bit. I don't know how good that is for you to see, but blow it up a little bit. And this is what's showing here is the global business environment. And I'm not going to read here everything, but you have quality imperative, free trade, global competition, etc. And so you have four sectors: technological environment, social environment, competitive environment. How are you? And the economic and legal environment. So those are all the environments that a business goes through, and this is something that has an impact on each and every business as we talk about, and it impacts not only business management but also it impacts job creation as well. This particular slide talks about how business can affect, uh, how government can affect business. And notice here, there's a number of things that we talk about, uh, and some of the various important things are. Notice it says allowing private business. We don't think about that in the United States. Uh, because anybody that wants to start a business in the United States, if he or she has the wherewithal, can start a business. There is nothing that says they can't start a business. Now, yes, there are some zoning laws. You may not be able to open uh, an establishment that sells alcohol and tobacco within so many feet of a school. There may be some other things that restrict you to certain areas based upon the environment or some other type zoning laws. But other than things like that, nobody says you can't start a business. So what this is talking about is that we have, part of the United States, a business-friendly environment. There are some restrictions. I mentioned some. There are probably other restrictions that would you have. Certainly, if you were going to open a business that would foul the environment, there might be some restrictions on what you could do and things of that nature. But one of the things it talks about here is opening up, allowing for business, not putting too much red tape on businesses and restrictions and laws and things of that nature. Also, not overtaxing businesses. Uh, and then some of the other things we see here, again, we take for granted. Look at number 5, establishing a currency that's tradable in world markets. Now, we don't think about that. We don't think about that because the dollar is the dominant currency in the market. The Chinese, of course, are moving to change that, and I expect they're going to work on that very hard over a period of years. The last one, I think, is one we also don't think about, and that's minimizing corruption. We don't want to, have to pay somebody so we can do business. And in many parts of the world, the only way you can open a business is by paying government people to not harass you and things of that nature, and allow you to open a business whenever you want to open a business and do whatever you want to do. So that's some of what this talks about here. A lot of interesting things. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but what it's talking about is just being open and allowing people to be open for business when they want to and where they want to. This just gives you a list of the least corrupt and the most corrupt nations in the world. Notice the United States is not within the top 5. And then here's some countries we have on the other side. Now this was done in 2011, so it may be somewhat different today. This is the ethics in making ethical decisions scenarios. I used to assign these. I don't any longer, but I do encourage you to read them. Just think about what's being asked and how you would act and react. There's no requirement that you do that, but I think you will learn something by doing that. By the way, that can be found on page 14 in the text. And I'll mention those as we go through the course. Now, here's the benefits of technology. We kind of all know what they are. And it helps us do a lot of things. It helps us do work, as I mentioned before. it also helps productivity. And how it helps productivity is by doing things that sometimes we don't like. The example I like to use is you call somebody, some business to get some information, you get an automatic telephone operator. And just think to yourself, how often you get frustrated about that? And you have to punch a number, or you have to do this or do that or something else. One of the reasons companies do that is because answering a telephone is labor intensive. And if they can take a person away from that and allow that person who is answering the telephone to be more productive in other ways, they're going to do that. And so that's why we put up with fuss about, sometimes do more than fuss about, having automatic operator answering us. This is just a little information here about what JCPenney does. I'm not going to spend any time on that. But you will find it in the text in an area called social media and business, and you can find this on page 15. You may read it. It's not a requirement, just something that's interesting. E-commerce, two ways e-commerce works. Obviously, buying and the selling of the goods and services using the internet. Two types: B2C, business to consumer, and B2B, business to business. This is a big area. I am not a person that really is up on this because I'm not a technically savvy person, but you really have to be careful about this. Don't ever give anybody any personal information that you have not initiated the contact in the beginning, or unless it's somebody that you know or some business that you know that you do business with. We constantly, my wife and I constantly get notifications that we've had some relative that died in a distant part of the world and left the money to us, and all we have to do is give them our bank account number, and they'll transfer that money. And it's a serious type thing. And by the way, if you think it's not serious, the Secret Service, which is concerned about that type, has actively pursued these people for a number of years. Just be careful about giving any of that away. And this is just a slide here that talks about how to protect yourself from identity theft. The folks who are into this business are becoming more adept, and it seems like the folks who are trying to keep them away continue to play catch up, unfortunately. Now, this is something we need to think about here, and that is that customers, us, we want quality goods and product, quality goods, and then besides the quality goods, we want quality service. And one of the ways that companies can do that is by doing a thing called empowerment. Now, what empowerment is? This specifically, if you notice the bottom bullet here on the slide, pardon me, specifically speaks to people who would be in call centers or would be customer service representatives, because it talks about frontline workers. Empowerment extends in many places, but we'll just use what it is here. And this is simply managers or supervisors giving their employees, or their direct reports, if you will, the authority to take action. And there's some responsibility for it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the object of this is it's a lot easier for the person on the other end of the line to take care of a customer's questions or a customer's complaints than saying, I have to talk to my manager. Now, obviously, it's a two-way street. You can't give it to somebody who's not reliable. But by the same token, the manager or supervisor needs to back this person up. And what I mean by that is that if the person does something that's not correct, I mean, it's not egregious, it's going to cost the company a lot of money, anything else, the manager has to back that person up. He or she may say to the employee, that's not the way we do business, here's the way we do business, but off to the side and not browbeat them or things like that. So this is a big thing. You'll find empowerment in several different courses, talked about in several different courses in this curriculum. And just what it simply means is that the manager supervisor is giving the person who would be directly interacting with somebody first, giving that person the authority and responsibility to make decisions and take care of actions. This is a way businesses find out what's going on. And notice here what it talks about, a statistical study, but it breaks down a population, a geographic population, by a number of characteristics. And they mention them here: race, color, creed, age, perhaps, income, whether they're a college graduate or not, and things of that nature. This is just a slide. It gives you demographics in the United States by age. Again, this was done in 2014, so excuse me, 2011. So you see it's almost 4 years old, and it's probably changed quite a bit. And this is the demographics by race in the United States. This is projected by 2050. And you'll notice that there is no one race that has 50% of the population. I think you will find that this will actually change a little quicker than 2050. I expect it to change about 15 years from now. Maybe not quite as dramatically as what we see here, but I do expect it to change. I expect by 2030, the white population will no longer be 50% or higher in the United States. I may be wrong, but I do expect it to change a little quicker. And this is just another slide. It gives you where the Hispanic population is in the United States, the largest and the smallest, and not something that we need to pay attention to. But if you want to open a business and you want to cater to, or you want a lot of your clientele to be Hispanics, you know that some places you're going to have a fairly good sized population, and other places you won't. And this is our changing population. The population is radically changing. Look at the third bullet. There's a growth of single parent households, and that has a significant impact on the way we do business. As a matter of fact, the proliferation of child daycare centers and employees wanting daycare has a significant thing. You will notice one of the videos that you're going to watch is SAS Corporation company in North Carolina. And one of the things that it offers is on-site daycare. They're not the only one, but they are certainly one, and they champion it. They talk about it. And they think that that's one of the reasons they're able to attract the type of employee they want, because they offer a benefit that employees today are looking for. This just talks about Social Security. I don't like to get into this too much because sometimes it seems like it's a scare tactic. We do know that Social Security is changing, and it will change, and something that all of us need to be cognizant of. One of the things that I would encourage any of you to do, if you're concerned about Social Security, is to write to your member of Congress or your United States Senator and say, you know, this is what we're concerned about. For instance, you know, they talked about, I'll give you the two sides of the street here. They've talked about changing the retirement age to age 67 or maybe 68 or 69. Well, if you're a person that makes $75,000 a year, changing that retirement isn't going to make much difference to you. But if you're a person that makes significantly less than that, say $35,000 or less than that a year, and you have a family you're concerned about, at least you have a spouse, changing the retirement age makes a big difference. And so we tend to be, in some cases, in Social Security and many other issues in the United States, we tend to be polarized, and we need to find a common ground, and a couple of other things, and look at what Social Security was actually meant to do, and preserve the benefits as best as we possibly can. This is just another slide with, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. It talks about people being concerned about Social Security, et cetera. And again, it's not something that I'm going to spend any time on. Not to, and I don't mean to make that a scare tactic. There is this part of the book. This is something we do need to be concerned about, and that is changes to the global environment. Now, this is talking about our competition. It's talking about free trade. It's talking about distribution systems. And of course, we communicate much better today, or we have the ability to communicate much better. And whether we do or not, it's a different story. But there is, to give you just an idea about polarization again. There is a trade bill that's before Congress to give the president authority to implement a trade that I think it's called Trans-Pacific. It's specifically with Asian countries. And there are many people in the labor in the United States are very concerned about that, because they have said that every time we've gotten into a trade agreement with other countries, jobs go out, and these other countries don't pay as much attention to the environment and things of that nature, and winds up in a net loss of jobs in the United States. So how that's going to play out, I don't know, but that's another issue that certainly is something that we need to think about. These are just, this is just another one of these gee whiz slides, the largest cities of the 1950s and the difference in the 2010. Just notice that New York City, the New York City, Newark area, New York, New Jersey area was the largest in population, and it is no longer in the top 5. This is another era that we have thing that we have to worry about when we get involved in wars and terrorism. There's a bill to pay for that, and we're paying some of that bill now with security and when we go through airports and things of that nature. So those are things that we have to think about. Global greening is something that most countries really want to do. There's a concern, however, about companies being efficient and being able to produce more. And the thought is, well, if they can produce more, why we don't have any more? Excuse me. They're more efficient, so they produce more, and then there's more to purchase, more to buy. And so what that is they're producing more with less resources, less money, maybe even less employees or fewer employees. Because if there's now a glut of this, people will tend to consume more. So we haven't really saved anything. How true that is, I'm not sure. But I did attend a conference in March where this was a big pitch by one of the people doing a presentation. And these are things we can do personally to protect the environment: use reusable bags and less water, drive fewer miles, buy a more fuel-efficient car, and things of that nature. I'm not going to spend too much more time on that, but is it important? Yes, and I think we need to think about it. Now we're getting close to the end here of this hour. This talks about, this is toward the end of chapter 1. We have gone in the United States from an agricultural era, which really existed from the founding of the country. Well, yeah, founding of the country. It wasn't a country in those days. Colonies of England and France for the most part, Spain to some extent as well. And that really lasted up until the early part of the 20th century, the early 1900s, when we moved from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy. Then we went from a manufacturing economy uh, about 80 years later, we started into the service era, maybe in the 70s and then the 80s, and now we're into an information-based era. Uh, we still have manufacturing. We'll talk about manufacturing when we get to chapter 9, and we'll find out that the United States is still manufacturing pretty well. Not as many jobs in manufacturing as there used to be. That's because we're better doing what we did, better at doing what we do now. And this gives you an idea here. In the 1800s, we went from agriculture was on top, and then we had things that came along that made agriculture easier to do, the harvester and the cotton gin and things like. Of course, cotton gin actually was in the 1790s, and notice it said we went to fewer farms, and then in the early part of the 20th century, as I said, we found that we went to the industrialization, and then as factories became more efficient, obviously fewer workers. And part of that's what we're seeing today. And then we went to the service era, and we're probably in some cases still in the service era when we think about many of the people who are employed and high paying service area and medical services and things of that nature. And then we've gone from the service area to the technology area, and information technology affects us all, no matter what our walk of life happens to be. Well, we are at 5:18. We have just finished chapter 1. I thank both of you for your attendance. We'll get into chapter 2, and I'm going to take about a 5-minute break, and please come back at 5:23. Thank you. I was taking a break. All right, it's 5:23. We're ready to start chapter 2. And I just want to take this time, Ms. Miller and Ms. Simmons, to thank you both for joining and to tell you that as I'm going through this anytime, if you have questions, please ask them. That's one of the reasons I'm here, one of the reasons I like for you to participate. And don't worry about asking any question. They've all been asked before, and perhaps you can come up with a new one, but please ask them if you have them. I want to make sure that I don't say something that you don't understand or don't understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. So now we're going to get into chapter 2, understanding economics and how it affects businesses. Our learning goals for this chapter, we're hopefully going to explain the basics of economics, or economic basics. Explain what capitalism and how free markets work. By the way, I like to use the term free market system and not capitalism, because capitalism has a bad connotation to it. And then we're going to compare socialism and communism. Actually, we're probably going to compare socialism to capitalism, free market system, and communism to the free market system, as much as compare them against each other. We'll look at the trend toward mixed economies. I don't really think we're going to analyze it. We're just going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the economic system in the United States, including some of our key economic indicators, such as the GDP, gross domestic product, productivity, and then what's known as the business cycle. And then finally, we're going to look at the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about those two in chapters 19 and 20, but we're going to introduce those topics here in chapter 2 and explain how each affects the other. The person who has had the most profound effect on economics in the United States, at least since the 1930s, was a gentleman by the name of John Maynard Keynes. Now, you'll notice it's spelled K-E-Y-N-E-S, but it's pronounced Keynes, like you would say candy cane or sugar cane or something of that nature. Great influence in the United States. And he believed that when an economy was in recession, that government spending had to be ramped up. And otherwise, the economy would continue to stagnate. And then this is the large book that he wrote that it really became the gospel for economists in the United States for a long period of time. Now, there's other people that disagree with him, most notably the late Nobel laureate Milton Friedman, who was an economics professor at the University of Chicago. And he believed in a different school of thought than Keynes did. There are two types of economics that are taught. One is macroeconomics, the other is micro. Macroeconomics looks at an economy as a whole. So we're talking about macroeconomics. We would talk about macroeconomics in the United States, and microeconomics, we're actually talking about us. We're talking about how we make choices with our scarce resources. And we do that every day. And one of the things that we do without thinking about it is when we buy a product. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether we need the product or not. That's irrelevant to what I'm going to say here. When we buy a product, that means we are not going to buy some other product. And just think about that. You have $25 to spend, and you spend it on groceries. And I'm not going to say you don't need groceries, and none of us would say that. That means that $25 you spent there cannot be spent on something else, because you don't have that $25 left anymore. So we make choices every day. This is what microeconomics is about, the choices we make and how we make those choices. Resource development is a study of how we use our resources to increase and create other goods and services and make our conditions better. So we're looking at how to increase the use of the resources. Now, the reason I'm using that term or saying that term or sticking with that term is that most of the resources that we use are finite. That means they're not replaceable. Once we use a gallon of gasoline, we're not going to get it back. And once we take petroleum out of the earth, we're not going to get that petroleum back. We have some resources that are renewable. Wood is renewable. We can plant a lot of trees. Coal, petroleum, gold, silver, other precious metals, they're not renewable. Somebody might come up someday with a way to invent something and make a synthetic whatever. There are some synthetics around. Certainly there's synthetic oil. A lot of people use that. But we have to think about that. And even the money we make, that's not replaceable. Yeah, now we could take it to the bank and we can get some interest on it. Not much today, but we can. And so we're making more money with that particular resource. But if we just keep that money for ourselves, we don't do anything with it, it doesn't build. And so that's what this is talking about here. But I do want to make the point that many of the resources that we have are finite. We have a hard time thinking about that. We have a lot of, I'm not sure where you ladies live, but we have a lot of water where I live. The Ohio River's, right a couple of miles south of me, where I sit right now. And there's a lot of water there. But if we go to California, there's a 4-year drought out there. And yet we still see people with swimming pools and things of that nature and say, it doesn't make any sense. Well, it's there. We have to think about that. And that's what I'm talking about, resource development here. Now, this gentleman is not well known, probably only known to economists. Name was Thomas Malthus. And he believed, as you can see on the slide, that the rich had most of the wealth, but the poor were greater in population. And because there were more people who were not as wealthy, I like to use that term, that resources would run out. And because he was an economist, it caused another person there by the name of Thomas Carlyle to refer to economics as the dismal science. And there are some people today called neo-Malthusians, new Malthusians, who still believe there are too many people in the world, and they advocate things like birth control and things of that nature. That's a different subject, that's a different topic, and I'm not going to go there. But we have some thought to think about here, because I'm talking about the things that I talked about before. We do have a finite amount of resources. And we have to learn how to either manage those better than what we've done. I'm talking about humankind, not just Americans, although we are pretty wasteful in many cases. And we have to think about that, how we're going to use them and make sure there's sufficient use. And that's why we need to think about renewable sources and renewable energy. Well, a flip side to, and we're coming to him in just a second, a flip side to Malthus was Adam Smith, and we'll get there in just a minute. So this is contrary to what Malthus had to say, that large population can be a resource. But notice what it says there, that population is a resource if it's educated. And that there's some economic productivity going on here. Businesses are created, the businesses hire people, they get jobs and things of that nature. So there's a give back to the economy, period, if you will. And the person that, by the way, we have a thing about being green, and I'm not going to get into that right now, because that kind of detracts from where we're going. You can find that being green in your text. I'm not dismissing it, but I want to stay on where we are. It's good to get to Adam Smith right now. Adam Smith is perhaps the father of economics, or at least the father of modern economics. He was an Englishman back in the 1700s. And he wrote a book that's popularly referred to as The Wealth of All Nations. That's not the actual title. Title's a little bit different than that, but that's what people talk about. Now, notice some of the things that Adam Smith had to say. And that is that freedom is essential. And what he means there, or what he meant there, was that's the freedom for people to start a business. And then other things that go along there, own property and land and things of that nature. And another essential part of his is to keep all the profits for him or herself. Notice the last one. And I think this is true, and I think we can relate to this. People will work hard if they think they're going to be rewarded. Two types of rewards, mostly, and we talk about a little bit in this course, and I'll mention them right now, and hopefully we can get to them when we get to the theories of motivation a little bit later. Intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Intrinsic comes from here, comes from within, the satisfaction in knowing you've done a job well. Extrinsic is something that's given to you by someone else, and that normally is recognition that other people see as well as you do. So that's Adam Smith. Adam Smith had a couple other things to say, but he's very important. And this was his next thing, and that was the invisible hand theory. And he talked about that there's an invisible hand. You have to kind of visualize this, if you will. And I want to read this to you. I don't usually do this, but this is important so we get this concept in our minds. And sometimes I do it to help myself as well. So it's not just so much for you. When self-directed gain leads to social and economic benefits for the whole community. So what he was saying is that when a person, let's talk about a person being an entrepreneur. Now that person starts a business, and he or she is successful, and as they're becoming successful, he or she is able to hire people, bring them in, and they earn wages and things of this nature. And this is invisible hand working to better the entire economy. We would think of an entrepreneur being a small part of a larger economy. Yes, that's true, but being able to do that all along. Now, there's one other thing that Adam Smith said, and I like to bring this up here, and that is that Adam Smith said that no one person could be made better off without someone else being made less well off. Now, let me explain that very quickly. Let's say you and a friend of yours, a coworker, are both up for promotion, and you're going to get whoever gets that is going to get a $5 an hour raise. So if you work 40 hours a week, it's $200 a week. It's a little over $10,000 a year. So let's say you get the promotion, and so your friend is made less well off in comparison to you. Now, what's what we have to think about in comparison to you? Your friend, your coworker, is still making the same amount of money, but in comparison to you, he or she is less well off, and that's what Adam Smith had to say. So don't think of that as being a negative, but that if one person is made well off, in comparison, another person is going to be less well off. And this is a little bit more understanding the invisible hand theory here. And that is a good scenario here of a farmer growing crops, and then farmer earns money because he or she sells the crops, and then he or she earns more money, so they're able to hire more hands to come in and help do the crops, and of course that may mean expand the farm, and then when the farmer his or her production's gone up, it means there's more food available for other people. So the farmer has helped him or herself, helped his or her employees, and then either directly or indirectly, how you want to look at that, help the local economy by production. That's, in essence, a little bit more of the hand. Now, this is another making ethical decisions. You can see this at the top of page 34. Now, let's move on here. Capitalism, or as I like to say, free market system. And I only say that because I think it sounds better. Capitalism took on a very ugly tone some years ago, and I kind of like to think of it as a market system because that's what it's based on. But notice here that in capitalism or the market system, the land, the factories, etc., are owned by individuals. And the government does not own them. Now, we do know governments do own some things, but for the most part, they don't own most of that in the United States. And most of those businesses, now we're talking about businesses who want to earn money, they're operated for a profit. Countries with the most capitalistic economies, the most market-based economies, we can see here, and I'm not going to go through each one of those. State capitalism is where the state either owns most of the businesses or controls them. And in fact, in some cases, when they not only own them, they run them, they operate them. Now, notice here that it says two of the most famous ones today are China and Russia. I would say China, yes, Russia, maybe. Russia has an awful lot of private people doing business. China does as well, but of course, China is a lot larger in population than either Russia or the United States. Now, countries have a lot of success in doing that, but there's a managed economy, if you will, when the government gets involved in it. China certainly has been on a roll. Russia not so much because they're dependent upon oil as a major part of their economy, or petroleum is a major part of their economy. And as you know, petroleum is a lot less expensive today than it was 9, 10, 12 months ago. So they're not getting as much money back into their coffers from the sale of petroleum and natural gas. China is not dependent on that. China has a lot of other problems. They have a lot of pollution problems and things of that nature. And one of the things that China has a problem with, and I was talking about the pollution, is it does not seem to be able to rein in these small mom and pop type operations. There's a lot of independent coal mining in in China, and that's fouling the air. A lot of factories burning coal, etc. And all you have to do is look at the pictures of Beijing and give you an idea of what's going on. All right. Now here are the 4 basic rights of capitalism. Now we sort of talked about them before. You have the right to own property. You have the right to own a business and keep all the profits if you wish. It talks about a right of competition, and I would just like to say that if you're in this kind of an economy, you're going to have competition whether you want to have competition or not. So I don't know the right of having competition is the correct way to say that, but it does give you some idea there. And then the right to choose. You can choose whatever business you want to be in. You can choose to open it whenever you want. You can choose to close it whenever you want. You can choose to sell it. You can choose to merge. You can do a lot. There are a lot of choices there, and the government is not going to tell you what you can and what you cannot do. So those are the 4 basic rights. And then Franklin Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, added 4 other rights. I've always wondered why he added the first one, freedom of speech and expression, when that is guaranteed by the First Amendment of the Constitution. But Roosevelt probably did that for a particular reason. The same way with the following one about worshiping wherever you want to worship and however you want to worship. That's also guaranteed by the First Amendment of the Constitution. But again, there may have been some specific reason that Roosevelt did that. Freedom from want and freedom from fear, those two really came from the Great Depression that we were in, started in 1929, and we probably didn't get out of that until the late 1930s, perhaps even as late as 1940. So those two were very important. And you may remember, you may have heard, I know you don't remember, you may have heard that one of Roosevelt's great speeches was he talked about the only fear we have is fear itself, or the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he was trying to buoy a population that was beaten down. At the time he took office, we had 25% unemployment in the United States. And when you think that many women in those days did not work outside the home, that was a huge amount of unemployment, even if they did work outside the home. That's a quarter of the people eligible to work and able to work could not get work, could not find work. And so Roosevelt certainly wanted to do that because he was trying to get people to feel better about things that were going on. And this is the free market. It's kind of going to sum up the points that we've made here. We, the consumer, tell the manufacturer what he or she can produce. Now, somebody's going to tell me, no, wait a minute. Procter & Gamble's been making Tide detergent forever, and nobody's told them to do that. Well, if we stop buying Tide detergent, Procter & Gamble would get the message and do something different. So what does Procter & Gamble do to keep that market? It continually refines, it comes up with new ideas about Tide detergent. I remember when they added bleach to it. I don't know what's in it today. I don't pay that much attention, but if we told them stop making it, we do that by stop buying it, they would. We wouldn't have any choice in the matter. So we tell them, and then we also tell them what we're going to pay for it. If it's a price we don't want, we won't pay for it. We say, oh, well, we'll wait till the generic comes out, or we'll wait till the cut rate comes out, and we'll buy that. We won't buy what your product is. So this is a reciprocal here. Manufacturers do make things that they think that we want or that we need, but we tell them, yeah, we're going to buy this, we're not going to buy that, something else. I give you an example of the Edsel automobile, which was made in 1957 and 58, or 58 and 59. Edsel was a Ford. Edsel 40, D-S-E-L, was Henry Ford's eldest son. I have read something about this, that the Edsel car, at the time it was manufactured, was the most studied, researched car that they could possibly do. And they brought it out, and I remember them. I'm old enough to remember them. It had, I hope you can see this, it had like an oval on the front of the grill. And some comedian said the reason they did that was so two ovals could come together and kiss, or he said something close to that. And that just really took off, and they never could sell the car. And 2 years later, it was off the market. And it wasn't like models changed. This was a big deal. And like I say, 2 years later, it was gone. And this just gives you the idea of what's known here as the circular flow. Input payments and how they go. We have businesses on one side, households on the other. We have input payments, and then back to factories, goods and services one way, buying power coming back another way. Now this is the pricing thing, and we're going to get into a little bit known as the concept of supply and demand. And notice here, and we'll actually get to a chart. We'll give you an idea of this. Guy or gal's manufacturing T-shirts and decides he wants to sell them, or she wants to sell them at $50 a pop. And people don't want to pay that much money. So then that entrepreneur, pardon me, decides to lower the price to 30. More people buy the shirts. And so he or she has established the price of $30 as what the consumer is willing to pay. In essence, in actuality, the consumer has told this entrepreneur, you want us to buy your T-shirt, you got to lower the price. And of course, he or she did because they listened to what was being said. And so here we have what's known as this is a supply curve. And you can see this graphically displayed here in your text, quantity of T-shirts, etc. You can see this three different figures, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 on page 38. And so this shows the quantity of T-shirts this individual is selling at different numbers of price. So we have both quantity, we have both the supply, and we have the demand here. Now the demand is a little different than the supply in that the demand says the quantities of product that we are willing to buy at different prices. And then you see the demand curve here, the quantity of T-shirts, the price on the left, the quantity on the right. Now it's kind of an inverse thing here, but you notice that at $50, this guy was selling, or gal was selling about 5 shirts. At $30, he's selling a lot more. And of course, as it may go down, then he or she is going to sell a lot more. 4 degrees of competition. Now, when we talk about this, we're probably talking about this in many cases only in the United States or in another country that has the type of economy we do. Perfect competition, which you probably will not see. Monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and then a monopoly. Sometime in perfect competition, you may see this as the text points out, something like agricultural market. Your sellers are identical, etc. So the competition is perfect. If you go to a local farmer's market, most of the product that's available for sale is pretty similar. And so you pick and choose between these folks based upon, well, what you think is quality, or price or something of that nature. It is possible that you're going to have to do some mixing and matching. Monopolistic, we only have a few people in the market. Products are very similar. You can think of some of our cola things like Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola, 7-Up, Dr. Pepper. Oligopoly, just a few sellers dominate the market. And then the monopoly is, normally speaking, when you have one in the market. Okay, we have some benefits. Competition allows people to do a number of things, and it even forces people to do things. And most of the time, it's for the good. Obviously, it also provides opportunities for people to find work. It specifically talks about poor people here, but I'd like to stay away from that because while it does that, it also helps other people who are looking for jobs. It may not be quite as who may be better off than somebody else is. Yes, people do get greedy, and that can be a problem. This just gives you an idea of the tax rates in various parts of the world. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And these are atypical taxes. I'm not going to get into that either because it's not something we really need to pay a lot of attention to. Socialism. We find this in a number of European countries. There may be some other ones around the world. Most of the basic businesses are owned by the government. And the reason they do this is so that profits can be more evenly distributed. We do have mom and pop shops, and I'm not using the term entrepreneur, I'm talking about mom and pop shops, bakeries, butchers, and things of that nature. Notice that people are highly taxed because this system is a cradle to grave. Education tends to be free and things of that nature. There are some benefits. Social equality, although some of the European countries are having difficulty with that today, and then some benefits are offered in shorter work weeks and longer vacations and things of that nature. Now here's some downsides to that. One of the things it talks about here is brain drain because there are fewer incentives for business people. And since there are fewer incentives, for them to take risks, they may look to go other places. And then fewer inventions because the rewards are not as great as they are in a market-based economy. Communism is a whole different system. It is socialism taken to an extreme. I like to say it that way because it's not only an economic system, it's also a political system where the government makes most of the decisions. Notice what it says, prices don't reflect demand. There used to be pictures years ago of people standing in line and around the corner several blocks in Russia to get bread. And before a lot of people got to the door to get in, the bread was gone. And the answer to that was, well, we only produce so much bread. So it was never based on demand, and supply and demand, everything else. So communist countries have serious problems, and we don't have too many of those left in the world. Free market economy, that's what the United States is. And the market determines everything that goes on. That's us. Command economy is where the government decides what's going to be done and how it's done, and we see that in pretty much in China and a few other countries. We find that countries today are moving toward what's known as mixed economies. That's where some things are owned by the government, and there's also a free market system. That's here in we have some of that here in the United States. And that's what this is saying here. I'm not going to go over that. But we find that, yes, communist countries are disappearing, and we do find social governments are cutting back in some cases, and we are moving a little bit towards socialism, not as much as what some people like to think, but probably more than others like to think. That's China's mixed economy, or China's economy. China's growing faster than the United States, and a lot of people say that, yeah, that's true, but part of what China does is it has it's probably keeping its currency artificially low. And notice it's worried about housing. Many people are moving to the cities. It's fighting pollution issue. While some people think everything is rosy in China, we'll find out sooner or later that it's not quite as rosy as what many people think. Gross domestic product is the total value of all goods and services that are sold within an economy. Let's talk about the United States in a year. And as long as the country, as long as the company is within our borders, that counts for the gross domestic product. Notice the last thing, even if they're foreign owned. So that would be Toyota in Georgetown and Honda up here in Marysville, Ohio, or over here in Greensburg or Greencastle, I never can remember which, in Indiana. Some of those down south, etc. This just gives you an idea of our GDP in billions of dollars. Actually, our figure over here at the end of 2010 is in trillions. And then this gives you a comparison of other countries. We're still at 2011 quite larger than China, but I don't know how long that'll last. China has many more people than we do. This gives you an overview of things that the Federal Reserve is concerned about, as well as the rest of us. That is unemployment and a few other things. We have 4 kinds of unemployment: frictional, structural, cyclical, and then seasonal. And we don't need to worry too much about that, but you can see these down at the bottom of page 47 in figure 2.6. Structural talks about restructuring. Frictional is people who have quit work because they didn't like the job, etc. Cyclical means exactly what it says. It goes in cycles, recession, slowdown, whatever. And then seasonal is what it says, people who have seasonal jobs. This just gives you the unemployment rate in the United States. It's a lot better now than what it was. It's down around 5.5%. Still probably a little higher than what we would like, but not what it was just a few short years ago. Inflation, it's when there is a general rise in prices over a specified amount of time. Disinflation is kind of the reverse. Things are slowing. Deflation means when prices are actually declining because there's not enough money trying to buy what's available to be bought. And then finally, stagflation. Notice the dichotomy there. Economy is slowing down, but prices are going up. Consumer Price Index is a monthly statistical measure of a basket of commodities, for lack of a better term, and this is the cost of goods and services. And notice what they list down here. There are some things that are more volatile than others, and they'll be stripped out. So you get 2 pictures. You get a picture of one without food, which tends to be volatile, and housing, which tends to be volatile, and then a picture with them included. And the cost, these are some other things that are in the also in the Consumer Price Index. The Producer Price Index is a little bit different, and that's what it costs. Excuse me, I didn't get it over here. That's what measures the cost of goods at the wholesale level. That's before it gets to us. Productivity, something that we measure. We want to know that how well our workers are providing output, how the output's increased. And notice how things have gone because technology has helped. And this just gives us an idea of productivity in the service sector. and what it's done for us. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but what we have to think about here, and we kind of introduced in chapter 1, we may talk about a little bit more in depth as we go through the course, and that is technology has radically changed what we do, no matter who we are, no matter where we are, no matter where we work. And we need to think about that, and we need to embrace technology. Yes, in many cases, technology has cost jobs, but in other cases, technology has brought new jobs in. And so we need to think about that. And that's one of the reasons we need an educated workforce, because we have to be able to keep up with technology. And I would tell you, I tell most of my friends and associates, I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to technology. I learned technology very late in my career, career being my life, for a lot of reasons, none of them particularly good, but I haven't. So we need to embrace technology. We need to not be afraid of technology. We have to understand that technology is going to change the way we do business. It's going to change our lives. But we have to embrace it. We can't say, no, we can't do that. This is the business cycle, which we really have to pay attention to. There's four cycles we go through. Boom. We ought to understand that we're kind of in that right now. Recession. Notice it says 2 or more quarters of a decline in the GDP. That would be 6 months. Depression is a severe recession, and then recovery when things start getting better and we're going to get ramped back up. I like to do a little digression here. The Great Depression was named Depression because the folks in the government, the economists, etc., thought that recession, which we just went through, was too strong of a word. And that's why they used depression instead of recession. Fiscal policy is established by the government. And the government does this usually in concert with the Federal Reserve to keep things stable. And to make fiscal policy work, there's only two ways the government can do that. It's via taxation and government spending. We have to think about things like the national debt. That's how much we owe to everybody else. National deficit, excuse me, is first here. It means that we're spending more, we're taking in. That is the sum of all the deficits. And then a surplus, we would hope to have one, obviously, is when we're taking in more than what we're spending. That's our national debt. I'm not going to talk about that. There are a lot of people who tell you it doesn't make any difference. There are other people who say it does because we have to pay the interest on the debt. And it means when we pay the interest on the debt, we can't be doing something else. This is just one of these, like I like to talk about, a gee whiz slide. I'm not going to spend any money at any time there. In our last slide, monetary policy. This is what's done by the Federal Reserve. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about this in chapters 19 and 20. So you can kind of think about this, what the Fed's trying to do. It increases the interest rate or lowers the interest rate. So when the economy's booming, it wants to, normally speaking, when it's booming, it wants to raise the interest rate so the economy doesn't overheat and go into a lot of inflation. And so then we have a general rise in prices. And when it's in recession, it tends to decrease rates. But what have we seen since 2009? We've seen interest rates down to around zero. And they're not, I don't think they're actually at zero, but they're very close to zero. And so it's a little different. And we've done it this way. Those folks have done it this way because they're concerned that even though the recovery seems to be marching along, it doesn't seem to be marching along as well as they'd like to see it march along. And they continually think it's a little soft. So that's why we see it that way. And there's some thought that the Fed will raise interest rates sometime later this year. But then every time you hear about it, something else comes up and say, oh, well, maybe we're going to push it off. So we're at 6:07. That brings us to the end of Chapter 2. Do either of you have any questions? I'll take that as a no. We'll come, okay, thank you. It just turned 6:08. We'll come back at 6:13. Chapter 3 is not quite as long, and so we'll probably spend about another half an hour, and then we'll be finished with chapter 3. So thank you. Please come back at 6:13. All right, it's 6:13. We're back. Chapter 3, Doing Business in Global Markets. Learning goals for this session. Look at the importance of global markets, role of comparative advantage and absolute advantage in global trade, importance of importing and exporting, illustrate the strategies used in reaching global markets, evaluate the forces that affect trading in global markets, look at the advantages and disadvantages of trade protectionism. I really can't think of any advantages. And then discuss the changing landscape of the global market and the issue of offshore outsourcing, which we've kind of touched on already. Well, here's an interesting slide for you. It's kind of what I like to talk about, a gee whiz slide. And most of the companies that are doing business globally think that people who are their employees need to have some experience in the global area. This gives you an indication of the world's population, which you can see in your text on page 61. I'll blow this. I just lost my way to blow it up here. Yeah, there it goes. Give you an idea of it. 60.2% of the population in the world is in Asia. There is just 7.4% in North America. I want to bring that down a little bit. We don't need that up quite as much now. Importing and exporting. Importing just means bringing goods and services, mostly goods, from a foreign country, the United States. Exporting is just the other way around. Notice that we're the third largest importing country, but we're the third largest exporting country. So it gives you some idea that we do a lot of exporting. And these are just the best countries for our doing business. I'm going to skip that slide. Now, notice here, we trade with other countries for various and sundry reasons. And notice that there are a lot of countries like Brazil and Russia that have a lot of natural resources, but they don't have a lot of technology. And so global trade should allow a country to buy and sell the goods and services, sell the goods and services it makes most efficiently, and then buy the services and goods that it doesn't make most efficiently. And of course, free trade simply means exactly what it says. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of that in the world. Notice that in our country, 89% of our GDP comes from goods and services produced in the United States and sold to people in the United States. Our exports are only 11% of our gross domestic product. That doesn't mean we shouldn't change that. It just means that we were self-sufficient for a long period of time. We're not quite that self-sufficient any longer. This says that we get into trade, that we should be able to do a lot of things like increasing literacy and life expectancy. How much that really does, I don't know, but it does have some bearing on it. Two things to keep in mind. One is what's known as comparative advantage. You will also see this often referred to as competitive advantage, but mostly comparative advantage is the term you want to use, and an absolute advantage. A comparative advantage is repeating for you what I said here about 2 minutes ago, and that is a country should sell the products that it makes most efficiently, and those that it cannot make efficiently, it should buy them. Absolute advantage is where one country has dominance over has the whole market to itself. And as the textbook points out to you, South Africa had pretty much an absolute advantage for many years in mining and production of diamonds. It no longer has that. There's other countries in the southern part of Africa, not South Africa, southern part of Africa, that are giving South Africa a good bit of competition. So those are the two things you need to think of. You will find this particular slide, the bullet here, find it partly in re-mentioned, I guess is the best way to say it, or said again in the text at the top of page 63. Only 1% of our small businesses export, but look at the percentage of exports that they have, 30% of the total. So that means small businesses are really almost an engine in a way, or a big part of the engine in our export business in the United States. This is just talking about where our debt is, and it's not something we need to pay a lot of attention to. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying it's not something we need to pay attention to here. This is how people get involved in importing and exporting. Our students are overseas attending schools, or students from overseas are here attending schools, and they find products that are not available in their home country, and they start working and trying to bring that into trade to bring them here. This gives you a picture of Starbucks coffee. It's easy to get involved in importing and exporting. There is a part of the Department of Commerce that will help small businesses do that. And it's not something that people should shy away from. If they have a product and people are looking for it, they're going to be able to buy it. This is how we measure trade. It's called balance of trade. This is how we look at our trade compared with somebody else. If we have a surplus, it's good. If we have a deficit, it's not so good. And so it's we're measuring trade based upon the total value of goods and services that are brought in or are sent out. And then, of course, along with that goes something known as the balance of payments. That's what we take in from foreign countries and what we pay to foreign countries. And of course, we want to have a surplus again and not be on the negative side. Now, these are unfair trade practices, and we don't really think a lot about this. We don't hear a lot about this, but this dumping is where foreign countries bring product to the United States. Now, the ones that have been in the news in the last few years, and were just the case not too long ago, and I don't remember the country, but the big ones seem to be cement, which we wouldn't think about, and steel. And this is where a foreign country brings a product in the United States lower than what is charged someplace else. Now it's lower than what is charged in the producing country. It is prohibited in the United States, and although it's prevalent, these are some of the countries that have been charged with dumping, and South Korea is not on there, but it should be. It was caught doing both steel and cement, as I remember. So what this does is it really changes the dynamic. It penalizes manufacturers in this country because they can't compete based upon that price. And unfortunately, there are some people in this country that will buy that even when they realize the price is lower, and that's not something you ought to be doing. Uh, so, it's a real problem. Now, these are the ways that foreign countries, we're talking about the United States here, get into foreign, not in with both foreign companies and into foreign countries to be able to sell their goods. And it runs the gamut. By the way, you can see this slide, figure 3.4 at the top of page 67. It runs the gamut from licensing, which is the least amount of commitment and control, all the way up to foreign direct investment. Notice that the risk changes as well. So you have least amount, commitment, control, risk, and profit potential with licensing, least amount, greatest amount when you have foreign direct investment. Licensing is simply what it says. A foreign manufacturer, in this case we're talking about the United States, provides the right to another company in a foreign country to manufacture its product, and perhaps use the trademark as mentioned here, and they pay, and the licensee, the person that is on the other end of the contract, that company, pays a fee, often known as a royalty. Now, how does this help the licensing company? Well, it gets revenue they wouldn't have gotten before, and there's not a lot of outlay. They don't have to spend a lot of money, somebody else doing this particular thing. And this talks about the export assistance centers. These are run by the Department of Commerce, and they will help both export assistance centers and exporting trading centers. They'll help they'll help businesses move along and get into the foreign countries. I skipped a slide or two. Okay, all right. Now we'll go to franchising. Now, franchising is no different in a foreign country than it is the United States. A company, and some of them down there at the bottom, some of the Brands folks, KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, that they will enter into an agreement, and the company in a foreign country agrees to sell their product, and of course there are certain limitations put on it. And we're going to talk more about franchising when we get to chapter 5, which will be next week. But the same parameters apply. One of the things that these franchisors have found out, especially in the food business, that what is great in the United States is not great someplace else. And as you'll notice when we talk about this later on, if you want to go to McDonald's in Germany and get a beer, you can do that. Why? Well, beer is the national drink in Germany. And, I think when I was in the military, the first place I could remember that I could order a beer that I happened to be in Germany, an establishment, a retail establishment, that I could order a beer if I wanted one was a drugstore. I don't know of any drugstore in the United States where you can buy a beer. Now, maybe you could years ago, but certainly not in my lifetime. So it just shows about the changing. And what that simply means is that the franchisor company here in the United States has to be able to adapt. And a lot of them have done that, and they've been very successful at it. It gives you an idea here what Dunkin' Donuts does with their various flavors that they sell in Taiwan. And then here we talk about McDonald's, what it's done, 32,000 restaurants in 117 countries. And then different things that you can get for a Big Mac or a McDonald's in Malaysia, Egypt, Japan, Germany, the beer I just talked about, and Israel. Contract manufacturing is another way that foreign company can get into there, and that's where foreign company produces private label goods. And then the domestic company, Nike, for instance, puts this label on it and sells it to the American consumer. That's outsourcing. Can't change that one way or another. Now, it can be used for a number of ways, experiment the new market, etc., meet unexpected increase in orders, and things of that nature. Joint ventures, exactly what it says. It's a partnership. There's no difference here. And we had, I think the most famous joint venture that I can remember that was done here in the United States was between General Motors and Toyota. They're going to produce a car for the California market. Unfortunately, that did not go well. I don't think that there was any one company was fussing with the other company. It's just something that didn't go well, and it ended a few years ago. Now there's some other ones going on in this country right now, and I don't have a good example. I wish I did, but there are some that are going on, and it is some car manufacturers doing some of these things. So notice here some of the benefits. You've got shared expertise, if you will, and of course the risk is shared as well. And then you get some other expertises of management and marketing and things of that nature. And you may not be able to enter a foreign country unless you have a joint venture. Strategic alliances, exactly what it says, a little bit different than a joint venture. This is where this is more of a symbiotic relationship here. And they work to their advantage in a competitive market. Notice that they don't typically share costs or risk, etc., but they provide access to the market. So it's a little bit different than a joint venture. And it's an interesting phenomenon. And then, of course, foreign direct investment, that's where you're actually buying a business in the country. You may be buying some other type things as well. And then a foreign subsidiary is owned by another company called a parent company. You maintain control. You have to commit funds and technology within the foreign boundaries, and that may be a downside. A multinational company is a company that does business in a number of localities. And notice it also may have stock ownership across those boundaries, and also management may be there as well. Notice what it says here. Not all large firms are multinational. And it really boils down to manufacturing capacity and ability to do that, to put your physical presence someplace else where you can really be called truly multinational. So a lot of companies do that. I use an example of Procter & Gamble before they have manufacturing plants in various parts of the world. And so they do that. Matter of fact, a neighbor of ours, daughter spent some time with Procter & Gamble, worked for Procter & Gamble in Singapore a couple of years ago. And Procter & Gamble moved her family over there, lock, stock, and barrel, and then brought them back when she returned to the United States. Sovereign wealth funds is something a little bit different. These are investment funds that are controlled by governments. And notice that the governments actually hold a stake in the company. So this can be good, it can be bad. you have to stop and think about this, because if the government owns that and the government decides to do what's known nationalize, the company that they were in business with is out of luck. And this happened in quite a number of places. Of course, it wasn't because of sovereign wealth funds, but because of something else. So you have to be careful about this. Whether it's good or bad, I can't tell you, but there is a risk, and the risk is very high. And the high risk is that the company may lose everything if the company decides to nationalize. When Americans first went into Saudi Arabia for the petroleum, that was mostly American companies, and it was nationalized sometime after. I don't know how much American companies have to do with Aramco, which is something to do with Saudi Arabia. I can't remember exactly what that acronym stands for. But there were American companies over there that wound up losing out. I think they still might provide expertise, but they don't any longer own any percentage of that, and if they do, it's minimal. Here's how governments really affect trade. A lot of it's done by the people that live in that country, socio-cultural. And we have economic, legal and regulatory, and of course, physical and environment. This is a big issue here, and I think we all know that. We see it occasionally, and that's trying to do business in a foreign country when the social conditions are much different than the social conditions of the host of the company, the country in which it resides. And I'll use it. Talks here about social structures, religion, manners, values, etc. But one of the classic examples of this was when Disney opened Disney Euro, which was in France. This goes back a few years, maybe back to the turn of the 21st century. And it didn't go well at the beginning. One of the reasons is that Disney did not understand the work environment in France. And then there was a course I used to teach, talked about what Disney did, and they came to get all the people together, and they were all wearing a specific type of T-shirt. And the French looked at this like it was a return of the Nazis. France was occupied during the Second World War from 1940 through 1944, or June of 1944. And the French looked upon what the Americans were trying to make. This is what's one big community, and they took it a totally different way. So it's one of the things that really have to be careful about. What does the culture allow you to do? How does the culture change? What is different here? We have some things we have to stop and think about. One size doesn't fit all, and we need to know that. We need to find out what it is before we get in there and do that work. These are some things that are talked about, lost in translation, where we American companies have used, and some other ones. Nokia is mentioned down here. That where we have used slogans that actually were different. British Airways, or Braniff Airways is mentioned there. Braniff, I don't think it's any longer in business. But we did things that I guess my favorite is the one that General Motors tried to sell a Nova in Mexico, and didn't understand why people wouldn't buy it. When Nova down there means no go. Well, why would you buy an automobile that didn't go anywhere? And they didn't figure that out for some period of time. So those are things we have to, those are the funny things we hear about. And those are the things that really cost us a lot of business. This particular slide just simply talks about things that you don't do in certain countries. That is about Turkey. Don't fold your arms in front of somebody. Of course, that sends a bad signal in the United States, but we don't think about it as much. And there's some other ones here as well. We need to be cognizant of that. we don't think about those things because of the different assembly that we have in this country and what makes this country up. A lot different than what we find other places. Germans like to have titles associated with everything. If you're a person that has an advanced degree, and I'm not talking about a physician who's called doctor, I'm talking about a person like me who has an advanced degree. In Germany, that goes along with it. I mean, it's Dr. So-and-so, et cetera. And notice that Frau and Herr, Frau meaning housewife for the most part, Herr meaning Mr. So those are things they want. They want to be called that way, and that's something that we don't do in the United States. So this is not meant to say the United States makes a lot of mistakes or the United States is always wrong. It's just if we're going to do business in foreign countries, we have to learn how to do business. Exchange rates are another thing. We talked about that before. I mentioned that the dollar has a high value against other currencies. It means we're going to sell less overseas. It means we can buy more foreign imported goods. And that's the situation we're finding right now. And this is devaluation and counter trading. Devaluation is where a nation's currency is simply devalued. And somebody could say, okay, the dollar is no longer worth $1. It's worth 75 cents. That's happened in the United States before, where the currency's been devalued. It's been a long time, but it has happened. Legal concerns. This is the big issue. Many countries simply don't have good legal systems. We find that the laws are not only inconsistent, they're inconsistently applied. Bribery in many foreign countries is a way of life. And the United States has what's known as the Foreign Corruptions Act, Foreign Corruption Protection. I may not have it exactly right, but what that simply says is no American business doing business outside the United States can pay a bribe to somebody to get business. When in fact that's a way of life over there. Now I'm not here to defend bribery, but I'm here to tell you that's what happens. And if you want to get business, that's what you're going to have to do. If you don't want to get business, then you're not going to do it. It's as simple as that. So we notice we have to follow our laws when we're doing business over there. And I think that we should. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I'm just trying to point out the issues that we face. There are environmental forces. Many countries simply don't pay as much attention to the environment as we do. And we have other problems of transportation, storage, and things of that nature. And then we don't know what the technological sophistication of other countries is. Now, if we're going to Western Europe, for the most part, we know what that's going to be. If we go even into some countries in Eastern Europe, we have a pretty good idea what that's going to be. But when we get into Asian areas, we just don't know. And of course, if we go to China, China has restrictions on the type of internet services that can be used. Some things are blocked, so we have to pay attention to that. Well, there's other barriers that China raises to keep foreigners out, or to make it very difficult for them to do business. Trade protectionism. This is an issue that comes around quite often. And this is simply government regulations to either restrict or prohibit trade. What many of these people say is we're going to do this because it helps the home folks, allows them to produce and survive, et cetera, et cetera. One of the ways that trade protectionism is done is through what's known as tariffs. Another word for a tariff is a tax. And it's placing a tax on imported goods. So notice here there are two types of tariffs. One is protective. That's to help the domestic folks who are producing the same goods. Could be oranges, could be milk, could be chickens, could be anything. So to protect those industries, if you will. And the other is revenue. And that is, we're going to put this tariff tax on something coming in, and we're going to collect some money from it. Now, other ways to do this are import quotas, simply saying, Mr. or Miss X country, you can only have a big orange crop, which Brazil does, by the way. You can only import so many of those into the United States. You cannot go over what your quote is. And I'm not making that story up, by the way. We do restrict Brazil from so many oranges because we're concerned if they bring too many of the oranges in, it would hurt our citrus growers. Embargo, nothing. Nothing can be brought in, period. We've had an embargo against Cuba for 50 years. It hasn't worked. Yeah, it's kept those products out of the United States, but there's other countries that buy them. There's an old story that before President Kennedy slapped the embargo on Cuba, he made sure that he got a quantity of Cuban cigars. I don't know how true that is, but there's a lot of people say that is true. And what I mean is it hasn't worked. You can go to Canada and buy Cuban cigars. You can go to other countries in this world and buy Cuban cigars. You can't buy them in the United States. That's going to end soon. And of course, we still have embargoes in place against Iran and North Korea, and those will probably not end anytime soon. There's an organization called the World Trade Organization, and its purpose, first of all, we had the General Agreement on Tariffs and Taxes. And then we've got the World Trade Organization, which there's 153 countries, and the World Trade Organization is supposed to arbitrate trade disputes. There was one a few years ago that the islands in the South Atlantic that had some long-standing relationship with France and the European Union, or they grew bananas, and they were the only ones that were allowed to import bananas into the European Union because there was some connection with France and a few other countries. And the United States took its case to the World Trade Organization because Chiquita, which is an American company, was being kept out of that trade. It might have been another one besides Chiquita, but they were the big ones. And the point of the matter was that if Chiquita bananas had been imported into the European Union, the consumer would have paid less for a banana. But the European Union had raised this trade barrier, even though they're not supposed to do that. I don't remember how that case wound up, but the World Trade Organization is set up to arbitrate those cases, and it has the power granted to it by the countries that belong to the World Trade Organization to arbitrate and to set penalties. The common market, our most common markets that we know about, the European Common Market. There's a few other ones that are listed here, which I'm not going to go through. This gives you the number of, the number of countries that belong to the European Union. There's free trade amongst these countries, and you don't even have to have a passport to travel between these countries anymore, like you used to have to many years ago. It's very interesting to travel between them because you don't have to have them. Now, they'll come in and check your passport to make sure you can do that, but I remember driving from Portugal to Spain and nobody stopped me at the border crossing. My wife was with me, of course. But stopped us at the border crossing and said, "Let's see your passport." Now, we were on a train traveling to Hungary, and they came in and checked our passport for some particular reason. I can't remember, but it's a lot different. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Act, which was signed in 1994 between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And these are the things it's supposed to promote. There are people who are still complaining that American jobs have been taken away, etc. It has done some good. How much good it's done, I really don't know. Yes, we did lose some jobs, but I don't think it's quite as bad as what some people say it is, and probably not as good as what the people would like for it to be. CAFTA is just simply a free trade agreement with several South American countries. There's some more free trade agreements going on, as we've talked about, specifically South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. And then also mentions the Trans-Pacific Trade Group that we're thinking about getting into. This is the future of global trade. India and China are the two largest population countries in the world, probably with population between them approaching 3 billion people. And so we found that many countries have gone there. We have some other countries that are expanding, Russia, but probably not as much as it was, and certainly Brazil, although Brazil's having some problems today, having problems over charges of corruption and a few other things. So what this tells you is that while foreign trade is something that you want to get into, there's a lot of pitfalls, a lot of things that you have to watch out for, and make sure you're not going to get snake bit. Things change dramatically, and certainly it's true with Russia, because they got mad at the United States for and other Western countries for slapping the prohibitions on them and sanctions on them after they went into Ukraine and the Crimea. And in one case, they wanted to close down, I think they did, a McDonald's in Moscow. Even though the McDonald's, everybody in McDonald's that worked there was Russian, and all the product that they sold was produced in Russia. So you have to be careful about these things. Outsourcing, we know what that is. We've talked about that. Unfortunately, in many cases, that is the shipping of, first of all, of operations overseas. And once the operation goes overseas, then the folks left behind in the United States don't have a job any longer. And it is a source of contention. But as I said before, people in the United States want to buy things as cheaply as they can. So we can't expect to see outsourcing doing a reversal anytime soon. This is a making ethical decision scenario. Again, I recommend you read them, but no requirement. But I do think we learn something when we read these things. And then finally, if you want to go into a global market, or if you want to work for a company that is in a global market, learn a foreign language, find out about the culture, and then take global business courses. All of those things can help you. We have come to the end of our 3 chapters tonight. I certainly want to thank each of you for tuning in. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. I do mention to you that
No.
there are lecture notes also posted for the course. You may want to check those and find some things different. I use the slides and talk to the slides, but there are lecture notes as well. The lecture is recorded and will be uploaded tomorrow, probably about 9:30. So if you want to review it again, it'll be uploaded. I'll send you a note where you can find it. Next week we'll do chapters 4, 5, and 6. Chapter 4, ethical and social responsibility. Chapter 5, how to form a business, and then chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a small business. I thank you both very much for your attention. I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Good night.
At the same time?
At the same time?
At the same time next week?
Yes, ma'am. Same time.
Thank
the same
you.
time
Thank
next
you.
week?
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.